The letter that never arrived. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the balcony. In his quiet Los Angeles home, the morning sun was soft, and the breeze carried a gentle chill. He looked out, holding a small box in his hand. The box was old, scratched at the corners, and tied with a faded ribbon. Inside it was something no one had ever seen. Not his friends, not the media, not even Sandra Bullock. It had been nearly 30 years since the movie that changed everything. Speed. People loved the action, the thrills, the chemistry between Keanu and Sandra. What they didn't know was how real it all felt behind the scenes, how, between takes and behind cameras, something deeper had quietly started to grow. But back then, Keanu was still healing. He was kind, generous, and gentle but broken. He had lost people he loved. He was afraid to let anyone too close. And Sandra, with her laughter, her light, and her beautiful honesty, reminded him of everything he had once believed in. She was full of life, always smiling, always looking out for others. Even when she was sad, she made sure people around her didn't feel it. One afternoon during filming, they sat together under a tree while waiting for a scene setup. Sandra was eating a weird snack chocolate with hot sauce and giggling at Keanu's confused face. "Don't knock it till you try it," she had said, passing it to him. Keanu had taken a bite, winced, and then laughed harder than he had in months. It wasn't about the snack. It was the way she looked at him, like she saw him, not the actor, not the fame, but the person inside. And for a moment, he wanted to believe it was okay to feel again. He wanted to write her a letter, to tell her everything, that she made him smile in ways he thought he forgot, that her presence made his grief feel lighter, that if things were different, if he were whole, he would have asked her to walk beside him, not just in movies, but in life. But he never sent that letter. Instead, he placed it in the small wooden box and told himself maybe one day, when things were better, when he was better, he would give it to her. Years passed. They stayed friends, worked on other films, smiled at red carpets, answered questions with grace. But life took them in different directions. Sandra fell in love. Keanu focused on healing, giving, building a quiet life filled with meaning and kindness. And yet, that letter in the box never left him. Then, one day, decades later, Keanu received a phone call. A close mutual friend of theirs, an old assistant from the Speed days, had passed away. During the funeral, someone mentioned how Sandra always said working with Keanu changed her life, how she always felt safe, seen, and understood, how once many years ago she had written something she never gave him. "Maybe we were just too gentle with each other," she had once joked. Keanu smiled sadly when he heard that, because he understood now sometimes the most powerful connections don't need to be loud. Sometimes they live quietly in the heart, waiting for a moment that may never come. But Keanu was tired of silence. He opened the box that evening, unfolded the yellowed paper with shaking hands. He read his own words and felt every emotion pour back like a flood. And for the first time in years, he wept, not out of regret, but because real love never fades. It just waits. And maybe now, it was time for the world to know the story. When memories walk beside you. KeanuReeves sat in the quiet of his living room, still holding the letter. Outside, the city moved with its usual noise: cars, footsteps, a dog barking somewhere. But inside his home, time had slowed, the sun had set, and the room was now dim, except for a single warm lamp in the corner. The wooden box lay open on the table, and next to it sat a photo. It was from the set of Speed, snapped between takes. He and Sandra were laughing about something no one else could remember, but their eyes, those told the story. He picked up the photo gently and whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" He had no way of knowing, of course, but something deep inside him told him she had always felt what he felt, even if they never spoke about it. There was a kind of closeness that didn't need to be spoken, the kind that made even silence feel full. The next morning, Keanu called Sandra. He hadn't spoken to her in a while. Both of them had gone through so much. She had suffered losses too, but when she answered the phone, her voice sounded exactly the same. "Keanu," she said softly. He paused for a second, then said, "Hey, Sandy." They spoke for over an hour, about life, about grief, about how fast the world changes and how sometimes the people who really matter drift away not because of anger, but because life pulls people in different directions. Then, quietly, Keanu told her about the letter. For a moment, there was silence. Then, she said something he didn't expect. I wrote you one too. He froze. You did? Yeah, she said, almost laughing through her tears. But I never gave it to you. I was afraid it would ruin what we had. And later, I thought maybe it was just a silly thing. But I kept it. Keanu closed his eyes. All these years, the people who had meant so much to each other had held on to words they never shared. They had both chosen silence over risk, safety over truth. Would you want to read mine? She asked. Only if you want me to. He replied gently. I'll mail it, she said. And maybe you can mail yours. And so they did. To envelopes, to stories, traveling across cities, through time, carrying truths that had waited far too long. A week later, Keanu received her letter. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he sat by his fireplace, holding it in his hands. He could feel her presence in the paper, in the words waiting inside. He finally opened it, slowly unfolding the pages. As he read it, tears fell again. She had seen him. All those years ago, she had seen through the pain he carried. She had admired his strength, his silence, his kindness. She had written about how just being near him made her feel grounded, safe. How she had wanted to reach out but didn't want to be another person, asking him to give more than he had. Her letter was full of grace, full of love that had no demands, only understanding. When he finished reading, he sat still for a long time. Then he reached for a pen, because there was something he needed to say, not just to her, but to the world. This wasn't a love story, like in the movies. This was something quieter, something deeper. It was about kindness that never fades, about souls that meet once and carry each other forever. He began writing again. This time, it wasn't just a letter. It was a message for everyone, whoever held back their truth out of fear. The stage they never stood on. KeanuReeves looked at the blank page in front of him. It wasn't just paper, it felt like a doorway into all the things he had never said, all the feelings he had hidden for years behind gentle smiles and quiet nods. The letter he had written to Sandra decades ago was still sitting beside him, open and soft from time. And now, after reading her words, something in him had shifted. He didn't want to just hold this truth anymore. He wanted to honor it. But how? He thought of all the years that had passed, the awards shows, the red carpets, the interviews where journalists always asked, what was it like working with Sandra Bullock? He had always answered kindly, politely, but never deeply, never fully, because some truths are too raw to fit inside a soundbite. But now, something in his heart whispered, it's time. He reached out to a producer friend of his, someone he trusted, someone who had once told Keanu that the world needed more stories of honesty and heart. He pitched an idea. Not a movie, not a documentary. A quiet live reading. Just him. Just his voice. No flashing lights, no background score. He would sit on a stage, a single chair, a table, a microphone, and he would read both letters, his and Sandra's. He called her again. Sandy, he said, I want to read them, for real, in front of people. Not because we owe anyone anything, but because maybe it'll help someone out there say what they've been holding inside too. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, only if you read mine exactly as I wrote it. I promise. A month later, a small theater in Los Angeles sold out quietly. No big promotion, no paparazzi, just a simple announcement that read, a letter to Sandra, an evening with Keanu Reeves. The night came. Keanu walked onto the dimly lit stage. He wore a plain black shirt, jeans, and the same pair of boots he had worn on the speed set all those years ago. In the front row sat Sandra. She wore no makeup, no bright dress, just warmth in her eyes and a soft scarf around her shoulders. The room was silent. Keanu sat down, picked up the first letter, his letter, and began reading. His voice didn't shake. But his heart did. He spoke of how lost he had felt back then, how her kindness had been like sunlight after a long storm, how every time she laughed, something in him healed, and how he had been too afraid to tell her then. When he finished, there was a long pause. Then he picked up her letter. His voice softened. He read how she had noticed the pain behind his eyes, how she wished she could have told him he didn't have to carry it alone, how her respect for him went deeper than the world ever knew, how she had always hoped he would find peace, even if it wasn't with her. And when he finished, he looked up. Tears were falling silently down Sandra's cheeks, but she was smiling. The audience was still, many wiping their eyes, because in those few minutes, they hadn't just witnessed letters. They had seen two souls that had always respected each other deeply, even in silence. And Keanu ended the reading with a single line. Some love stories don't need a kiss, they just need truth. Asterisk what the world did next. After that night in the small theater, the world began to whisper. Videos from the live reading began to surface online. Someone had quietly recorded parts of it on their phone. Keanu's voice reading the words, Sandra's quiet reaction, the silence of the room. These moments touched something deep in people. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was romantic in the way movies show love, but because it was real. Raw. Honest. And it spread like wildfire. Millions of people started sharing the clip. Not just fans, but people who had never even followed Keanu or Sandra. They wrote things like, "This made me call someone I hadn't spoken to in 10 years," or "This made me tell my mom I love her," or "I've been holding back my own letter. I think it's time to send it." Keanu was surprised. He had done it to honor a quiet connection, not to spark a movement. But somehow, that simple act of sharing something so private created a wave of healing across the world. Then came the letters. Hundreds of them. Then thousands. People from every country, every age, every background began writing letters of their own. Letters to old friends, letters to lost parents, letters to first loves. People shared regrets, gratitude, apologies, forgiveness. A university in Italy started a project called the Unspoken Words Archive. They invited people to submit letters they had never dared to send. And in a beautiful old building with stone walls and wooden floors, volunteers began translating those letters into different languages, displaying them for others to read. Keanu flew there quietly one afternoon. He walked through the halls, reading strangers' stories. One letter said, "I wish I had hugged you before you left." Another said, "I forgave you long ago. I just didn't know how to say it." He stood there for a long time, holding Sandra's letter in his pocket. He didn't need to reread it. He had memorized every word. When he returned to Los Angeles, he visited Sandra again. They sat on her porch this time, 2 chairs, a small table, and a pot of jasmine tea between them. She looked at him and said, "I didn't expect all this." "Me neither," he said, smiling softly. She paused, then asked, "Do you think maybe we were meant to be part of something bigger, like, not just you and me but something that helps others?" He nodded. Maybe this was always the point. They started a small foundation together. It was called the Letter Project. Its goal was simple: to give people a space to speak what's in their hearts, to share what they'd buried, to bring healing, not through advice or therapy, but through honesty. Schools joined in. Prisons. Hospitals. One day, a young boy from India wrote, "I never told my dad I loved him. He passed away, but when I read your letter, I sat by his photo and said it out loud. I feel like he heard me." Keanu read that letter aloud during a quiet evening fundraiser. His voice cracked. Because he realized something. This wasn't just about him and Sandra anymore. This was about the millions of people who had been carrying unsent letters in their hearts. And now, because of one story, because of 2 people who once shared chocolate and hot sauce under a tree they had found, the courage to speak. The moment that changed her. Weeks passed, and the Letter Project kept growing. People were writing, speaking, and healing. It reached more corners of the world than Keanu or Sandra ever imagined. But amid all the letters, all the stories, there was one moment still waiting to unfold, one that would test Sandra in ways even she didn't expect. She was invited to a women's shelter in New Orleans. They had started a letter-writing circle after watching Keanu's reading online. Many of the women had survived terrible things: violence, abandonment, loneliness. They had written letters to people who hurt them, to people who left them, and 2 versions of themselves they had lost along the way. Sandra walked into the room quietly, She wasn't there as a star. She wore a simple sweater, jeans, no makeup. She sat in a circle with the women and listened as they read their letters. One woman read, "Dear me, I'm sorry I stopped loving you when they did." Another whispered, "I still pray for the boy who hurt me, because I don't want hate to grow inside me." Sandra felt tears on her cheeks the whole time, not from sadness, from the strength of their voices. When it was her turn, she pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. It wasn't her original letter to Keanu. It was something new. Something she had written just the night before. "Dear girl I used to be." She began softly. "You were always enough. You didn't need to be louder, prettier, tougher. You didn't need to hide your heart just because the world didn't know what to do with it. I see you now, and I love you." When she finished, one of the women reached across and held her hand. Another simply whispered, "Thank you." That night, Sandra didn't go back to a hotel. She stayed in a small room in the shelter. She said she wanted to remember what it felt like to be part of something raw and real. Not fame, not applause, just connection. And that night, lying in a small bed with a thin blanket, she looked at the ceiling and whispered, "Thank you, Keanu." Because without his letter, without his bravery, she might have never found her voice again. Meanwhile, Keanu was on a different journey. He had been invited to speak at a youth prison in Arizona. The young men there had seen his reading. Many of them had never written anything personal before. They believed showing emotions was weakness. But one by one, they began to write. Keanu sat across from a boy named Darren. He had just turned 18. He had been in prison since 15. He handed Keanu a crumpled letter. "I wrote this to my mom." Darren said, "But she's gone. I needed someone to hear it." Keanu read it slowly. Every line was like a knife. "I'm sorry I never listened. I'm sorry I made you cry. I'm sorry the last thing I said was mean. I didn't mean it. I was scared." Keanu folded the letter and looked Darren in the eye. "She would have forgiven you," he said softly. Darren wiped his eyes and whispered, "You think so?" "I know so," Keanu replied. That moment stayed with him, because he saw something clearly. Letters weren't just words. They were keys. Keys that opened doors locked by pain, guilt, silence. And now, he and Sandra had helped thousands find those keys. But one question still remained. How had they never told each other in all those years? How had two people so connected still let life get in the way? Sandra asked that to one evening, as they sat watching the ocean in silence. "Do you think we missed our chance?" she asked quietly. Keanu looked at her, then said, "Maybe we didn't miss it. Maybe we were just waiting for the world to be ready for the story. When the story becomes the gift. Months passed since the world first heard the letters. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock kept doing what they had always done, living with kindness, walking humbly, and staying far from noise. But something was different now, not between them, but around them. People they had never met were connecting, healing, reaching out because of their story. One morning, Keanu received a letter at his home. It was handwritten. No return address. Inside was a photo of a little girl standing next to a hospital bed, holding her grandfather's hand. The note read, "Dear Keanu, I watched your letter video with my grandpa. He was sick. We cried together. I told him I was sorry for being mad when he missed my play. He smiled. 2 days later, he went to sleep forever. But I think he knew I loved him because of your story. Thank you." Keanu sat quietly for a long time. After reading that, he thought about how something so personal, something he had once hidden away, had become a gift to others. And that thought filled him with peace. Sandra visited him that evening. They sat in his garden under warm lights, sipping tea, listening to soft music playing from an old radio. She looked at him and smiled. "Remember when we were just two young kids trying to survive a crazy movie set?" He chuckled. "Yeah, and I thought your snack combo was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen." "Still is," she laughed. The laughter faded into silence, but it was the good kind. The kind that holds meaning without needing words. Then Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this," she said. "It's my second letter. I wrote it after the first, but never mailed it." Keanu took it gently. "You want me to read it now?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I want you to read it when you need it, not before." He nodded. tucking it into his coat pocket. "And I wrote another too," he said, "but I'm not giving it to you tonight." She smiled. They both knew this wasn't about unspoken love anymore. It was about timeless care, about souls that walk side by side even if not holding hands, about how, in a world that rushes and forgets, two people decided to pause and tell the truth. And the truth, they had always mattered to each other. Not for a season, but forever. Years later, the Letter Project became a global movement. Schools made it part of their curriculum. TV shows invited people to read letters live. Parks and cities had letter trees, where strangers could pin anonymous notes of hope, forgiveness, or love. And in a museum in Berlin, there was a glass case with 2 handwritten letters inside, Keanu's and Sandra's. A sign read, "Some stories never needed a movie, they just needed a voice." Keanu visited that museum quietly one afternoon. He stood in front of the letters. He didn't read them. He didn't need to. Instead, he whispered, "We gave the world something real." Behind him, a group of teenagers walked by. One of them paused, looked at the letters, and said, "I should write to my dad." And that's how the story kept living. Not in lights. Not in fame. But in hearts. Keanu and Sandra never chased a perfect ending. They just gave the world a beginning. And for many, that beginning changed everything.